It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WBC Talk Radio. I am your host, economist Steve Moore. I always say we have the best. I'm not the greatest radio talk show host, but I have some of the greatest guests who come on our show. And one of them, who's been a regular, is Rich Lowry, who is, of course, been the long-term editor of National Review, one of the most important magazines in the country. And it has obviously a conservative point of view. And so Rich and I have been friends for probably 25 or 30 years. Rich, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Okay, I want to get right in.
A guest on. I was waiting to hear who these brilliant guests were.
That is you, my friend. So Rich is just a fantastic political mind, among other things. So how worried should Trump voters be right now after the convention?
I think a little worried. I mean, clearly Democrats have increased their chances. The bottom had begun to fall out for Joe Biden towards the end prior to his defenestration there. Debate fallout, but then it just all fallout from Democrats and friendly media savaging him for a couple of weeks. And you were right. You were always consistently saying he was going to end up going. And sure enough, he did. And she's kind of at best a replacement level Democrat, but that's enough to bring Democrats home and to make it a really close race again. So certainly Trump's margin for error is much less than it was a month ago.
And so what was your overall takeaway from the convention? I have to confess, I didn't really watch much of it. I watched the first half of Kamala Harris' speech, and then I got a little bored with it. But do you think that convention was a success, a draw? How do you see it?
I think it was probably a success. It was a very annoying convention, among other things. I mean, it ran so late. You know, you had a lot of the primetime speakers coming on at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. But, you know, they made the case for her and her speech. You know, there's nothing the average person would have seen in that speech that would have alarmed or disturbed them or made them nervous. And she was a confident enough performer. So it's been a great month. I mean, besides, I think that the choice of Tim Walz was not optimal, but probably defensible, not a disaster. And the economic plan was horrible. But otherwise, it's hard to imagine a better 4 weeks, but the standard hasn't been very high, right? If the media is going to praise everything you do and the whole Democratic establishment is going to fall in line, it's going to be pretty, and all you have to do is talk from a teleprompter. It's going to be pretty easy to succeed, and she has so far.
So I looked at this in a fairly simple way, and you can kind of expand on it or tell me if you're wrong. But, this is an oversimplification, but, the Trump and the Republicans want to talk about the economy, right? They want to talk about the kitchen table issues, and Democrats want to talk about sort of identity politics, and they want to talk about abortion.
Yeah, abortion is the best issue they have going for them. All the polling shows that. It's led to this bizarre, you wrote about this, the hostage taking of the idea of freedom.
Freedom.
I don't even think abortion is a freedom because there's the interest of another person is involved, but nothing else they support has anything to do with freedom. In fact, it's the opposite. So they sell their agenda in terms of security, which at least makes more sense. But I think what Republicans need to do is not just talk about the economy and the issues. That's important. But Trump needs to make the character case against her, not, the sense of personal life or anything like that, but that she's too weak. She's too dishonest. She's too phony to be president of the United States. It all needs to come back to that. And they have a massive amount of material to work with. I was going back and looking at the 2004 presidential campaign, Bush versus Kerry. And Bush basically won that campaign based on 13 words, Kerry said, about, voting for the $87 billion before he voted against it. But it's because they didn't make it just about the policy, about the gap. They made him into a flip-flopping Washington insider who's too weak on defense to be president. And they have much more material to work with Kamala, but it all needs to come back to that kind of case against her.
Yeah, there was a very good piece by our mutual friend, Jim Pearson. I think that was in the Wall Street Journal, or I forget where I read it, but Jim's a smart guy. And he was saying that he was likening this a little bit to the Dukakis campaign. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that one, Rich. I think you might be a little younger than I am, but I do. And, they basically, I had forgotten this, Rich, but he says that coming out of the Democratic convention,
17
Cox had a 7,
17,
which is amazing.
17.
And what they were able to do was show him as being kind of incompetent and a liberal. And that was, of course, who was that ran that campaign for Bush?
It was a guy from South Carolina, Lee Atwater.
Lee Atwater ran a great campaign.
You can't talk about flag, Pledge of Allegiance. Can't talk about Willie Brown. Right. You can't talk about the Boston Harbor, but all that.
And he did.
The presidential races, you really need to disqualify the other person. It's just that their platform is bad. That's part of the disqualification, but it needs to be deeper than that. Obviously, Democrats are trying to do that to Trump, and he needs to do it in turn. He just needs to do it in a disciplined and focused way.
So I'd add one thing to what you said, which is that she and Tim Walz truly know nothing about business. They know nothing about the free enterprise system. They are, in fact, incredibly hostile to business. You look at their tax plan, their regulations. They hate business. In fact, I mean, I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but they view businesses, especially businesses that make money, as almost the enemy. Yeah. And I don't think that's where the American people are. Do you?
No, they're not. And it's surprising, given how she's trying to rebrand towards the center away from where she was in 19 and 20, how she's enunciated new positions that are far to the left, and has picked a governor who believes basically and governed on the basis of everything she said in 19 and 20. So I think, as Trump said at some point, if you didn't, it's certainly true still, that this is the most left-wing ticket that we've ever encountered. The only competition, I think, would be FDR and Henry Wallace in 1940. But even they weren't woke. They were far to the left on economics, but they weren't woke.
On social issues, yeah. Well, Rich, so what advice would you give to Donald J. Trump at this point, if you were one of his key political advisors, in terms of how to deal with Kamala Harris?
Yeah, well, one, I mean, he's already doing this. He needs to find ways to get his message out that are an end run around the traditional media. These podcasters, most of whom I haven't heard of before, but have huge audiences. And then I would think it may be the rallies have outlived their usefulness a little bit, because the media is so obsessed now. It doesn't matter if 90 minutes is on message, if 2 minutes isn't, that's all you hear about.
Exactly.
I tend to do more focused events, like a border visit. It's about the border. Doesn't matter really what you say. If you sit down with the families of fentanyl victims for a roundtable, and Trump's great in that forum, he doesn't have to read from a teleprompter, but it's an event about that. Do that with guys who work fracking, just do that over and over again. And again, bring the issues back to hit the issues, but bring it back to how she's a phony and can't be trusted, which is true.
Well, one last thing.
Of being true.
Good advice. I'm talking to Rich Lowry, who is the editor at National Review and one of the smartest political minds I know. So the Trump campaign, I think, also needs to talk about their record and what, if you compare just side by side on the economy, I'm sounding frustrated, because I am. There's a great piece the other day about how, Democrats have controlled Washington for 12 of the last 16 years, and they're blaming all the problems on Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly. So do you want to go back to a past that was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when inflation was low and the economy was growing and real wages were growing? Or do you want to stick with the failed present? That's the question. And again, I think that's an eminently makeable case. It's true. It's right there. All the material is there.
Rich Lowry, thank you very much for taking some time out of your weekend to join us on the More Money Show. We'll be right back, folks. It's the More Money Show on WABC.